Okay, great. Hi, everybody. You can hear me, right, Laura?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yep, I direct scientific programming here at Global Genes, and most of that work relates to the RareX platform. I'm going to share my screen. I sometimes have trouble with Teams. I'm mostly a Zoom user, so you'll just have to tell me if. Give me 1 second. Okay, I'm going to share it here, and then I'm going to put it in full screen mode, and you're going to have to tell me if that still works. Can you see that?
Yep. Yeah,
okay, and you see like the right version?
It says CASK-related disorders data collection, July the 16th.
Yeah, I mean, when I say the version, sorry, what I meant is you don't see like the side by side with notes in the business.
No, it looks good.
Okay, great. So the one weird thing is I cannot see you guys while I'm presenting, but certainly I'm happy for your questions throughout, and we'll stop at the end. So just for a tiny bit of background, so Global Genes is really the parent company. Global Genes is a kind of umbrella patient advocacy organization that's been around for about 17 years, supporting patient advocates in affected to some degree with rare diseases. So we really support individual patients, families, patient advocacy groups, larger communities. And about a year and a half ago, Global Genes and RareX merged so that RareX became the research arm of Global Genes. I came from the RareX side, so in the merger, I was directing scientific programs previously at RareX. So RareX is really a platform where we collect patient provided data. So most of that data is patient reported, but some of it is uploaded, which we'll talk about. So we really collect this data and ensure that it is research grade and standardized, and then we share that data with researchers. So kind of big picture, we currently support 76 different rare disease communities. And that support is side by side in collaboration with 115 patient advocacy groups. So the CASK community is one of those that's bringing that particular number up in terms of having one disease CASK, but multiple patient advocacy groups that are really coming together globally and working together on this single research initiative. We do currently have individuals who are enrolled across 90 different countries, and broadly on the platform, we have about 39% of participants on the platform live outside of the United States. Okay, so everything else I'm going to talk about is really very specific to CASK and to the data collection program that your community is leading. So for anybody who's not in the program now or familiar with it, there is this landing page, and I believe you can get to it through any of these participating organizations, but certainly on the Global Genes or RareX website, you would be able to find this, and you can find it pretty easily by Googling CASK and RareX. That's where you get started. So from a data perspective, we currently have an enrollment in this community of 130 individuals, which is a pretty solid number given the size of the total community. It will come as no surprise to anyone that there are significantly more females than males in this demographic, at about 84% females. And there's pretty good representation across age groups. So, that very young 0 to 4, 5 to 9, 10 to 17, and above 18, there's like reasonably good distribution across those. I'm always really delighted when I see that some of these groups do have reasonable representation of individuals over the age of 18, because I think it's so important that we don't forget about their needs, and that also we learn from what they have to teach us. This probably many of you have seen before. I think it's been shared like occasionally whenever these statistics come out. There is sort of the very first real survey that participants, usually caregivers, are answering on the platform is what's called the head to toe survey. And that's really a very high level. It's very quick and easy to fill out. Survey intended to find out what organ systems are affected. So does your child have symptoms related to the brain or nervous system? And then there's a list of examples. And so this is a list of those kind of just larger categories of symptoms across the community. I think it is a little bit surprising that brain and nervous system isn't 100% in this community, and it would be probably worth digging into that and finding out kind of more specifics about those individuals. I broke this up a little bit into the male versus female population, and most of these symptoms you can see are very similar in terms of the kind of order of frequency and in terms of the actual frequency number, pretty similar. Cognitive impairment and coordination issues are the top two concerns by frequency, and then hypotonia. So those top three are really the same across females versus males. As you go down farther, there are a couple that in the affected males, you do see at a pretty significantly increased frequency in comparison to females. Seizures in particular, parents report a higher rate of seizures in the male population, and also in major vision issues. So lots of families report some like abnormal eye movements, but whether or not that leads to significant visual impairment seems to be more frequently reported in families with affected boys. When we break down the age progression that I showed you before, the sort of below 5 to 9, and then the 10 to 17 and 18 over, pardon me, and look, you don't really see like a dramatic change for most of these symptoms. Now, I will admit that these numbers are kind of small when you start to parse it out, right? So in the patients over the age of 18, we only have 8 individuals making up this data right now. And just, you know, a little plea to anyone out there who has not input data or hasn't done very many of the surveys in here, that the more data we have, kind of, you know, of course, the better these comparisons and correlations can become. But this first side, you know, looks at children under the age of 5, and then we look at the adult population. And in the brain and nervous system symptoms, we don't see anything like super significant, I think, in those differences. In the muscle symptoms, there does seem to be a very clear progression. And when I didn't want it to get too busy, but when we look at all 4 side by side, you can definitely see some of that progression, that the self-report by families of abnormal muscle function, and especially of the arms and legs being affected, does clearly progress over time. Once an individual says yes, so once a parent says yes to one of these, it does then branch into what's called a clinical outcome assessment measure, which is a standardized assessment that really gets into details of muscular dysfunction in this case. And so once we get more of that data, we can share that data as well. So like right now, this is pretty high level symptom data. You know, does your child have any issues with the way that their arm and leg muscles work? When you say yes to that, what we really want is that next survey that then pops up to get lots of data there, because those are the standardized research surveys. I actually Just added this based on conversations around how common sleep disorders are in this community. This sleep survey is one that was just developed and added within the last 6 months. And so anyone who hasn't been super active, who created an account but hasn't been super active in the last 6 months, has probably not answered this particular survey. But this is really, I think, will be very helpful in delineating some of these specific symptoms. And then again, you know, if you say, yes, my child has disrupted nighttime sleep or maintenance insomnia with a real lack of restful nighttime sleep, there is a standardized research survey specific to that will pop up. So this is a very quick survey to answer, and I would really encourage everyone to answer this. Currently in the data that we have, which is 10 or 12 of these that have been filled out in your community, all but one person said yes to both of these two that I've circled. Okay, I'm going to switch just a little bit and talk about some of the genetic data that has been collected in the RareX data collection program. This is based on 30 uploaded reports. Remember, I told you there's 130 people who have enrolled. So far, we only have detailed genetic data from 30. So I want to pause here and remind everybody that we can accept genetic data in multiple formats and in multiple ways, including physician letters where that information is detailed. So it's important to researchers to have the genetic data. It's okay if they come from different sources. So sometimes our genetic curation team will curate the actual genetic test report. Sometimes we have a letter from a physician that will say something like, you know, dear Ms. Smith, it was lovely to see you and Emily last Thursday, as we discussed. You know, whole exome sequencing was completed, and here are the results. And they'll describe the results and what that means. So essentially what I'm telling you is we will take anything that helps us to get this data and helps us to get this data for the researchers who are really interested in this data in your community, because having it side by side with the rest of the data is really important. So based on that, what we see broadly is that many of the individuals in the community where we have genetic data have a variant, a genetic variant. Sometimes that's called a mutation, though that's less, that's being used less and less. So pathogenic variant is what typically gets used now. So most people have a genetic variant within the CASK gene. Some individuals have a deletion that might be like a pretty large chunk of material, but still within that gene. There is one person so far in the data set that has a duplication within the gene. And then we do see that a pretty significant percentage of patients in this community have large multi-gene deletions, meaning a large deletion of material that covers multiple different genes. And that actually, so if we look here at the chromosome, so this top picture is the whole chromosome, just laid down kind of on its side. There's this region where the CASK gene is, and it's actually a pretty gene-rich region. There are a lot of genes right here in this region. So if there is a deletion, a chunk of material missing, it can actually encompass several genes. So we see that with some frequency, and then we see as well these individual variants and deletions within the gene. So we can see both. We do see both in this data set. This bottom picture here, the one labeled B, each one of these boxes represents what's called an exon. So typically the exons of each gene are where the protein coding material is. It's the most important material typically. That's not always true, but that's typically true. And that's where most genetic variants are found. This came out of a paper that I've referenced here at the bottom. I think it's interesting that in your community so far, only the one that I have an asterisk here for is represented in this data set. So there's a real opportunity if there are researchers who are really interested in some genotype phenotype studies, we would love to have them access this data and start, and publish some of this data with some currently perhaps unknown genetic variants that families are sharing and reporting with us, but there aren't in the literature yet. Within those variants, we do see different types. So a specific genetic change within the gene can lead to different outcomes. And these can be categorized by those outcomes. So you can have the largest portion here that you see, the light blue, is what's called a nonsense mutation. And what that means is that as the gene is being read, when it comes across this variant or mutation, it just stops, and you don't get a full protein made. Frame shift mutations occur a similar way, that it shifts the way that it's being read. You don't get a full protein being made. The splice site variants, not always, but in this particular gene typically lead to the same thing. So essentially what I'm saying is everything except the red would be expected to result in no protein activity. Some missense variants can be milder and you can have some protein. I am aware that in CASK, there are some reports showing that there are some missense variants that can lead to no protein. This particular individual in this data set does seem to have a milder course of disease. Again, would love to have a researcher dive deep into this and dive into that data. So here's my call to action around that. It's very, very easy to share genetic data with us, either through a physician letter or through a genetic test report. That can be a file that you have in your medical record. That can be a picture that you literally take on your phone of a genetic test report that was given to you, a picture of the letter that was sent home with you. We'll sort of take whatever, honestly, and curate that data and make sure that that's available. Okay, I was asked if there is a way of connecting data sets. So the RareX data that we are collecting with this patient-reported and patient-provided data, or of course here caregiver-reported and caregiver-provided data, is it possible to connect that with other data sets? We don't have the capability of pulling in other data directly into our platform at this point, but we certainly want to be able to connect data sets. And in order to make that easier, here is the best way for you to do that. So within the RareX platform, when a caregiver is in there, so you can see my name here listed as a caregiver, and right at the top in the demographics section, there is this tiny, tiny short survey called Additional Participant IDs. And this is intended to enable people to put any other research study that they're a part of, to put that number in there. So, it will ask, the very first question it asks is, does the participant have a clinical research ID or a CRID? Some people have a CRID, which is a persistent unique identifier number that they've used in multiple places. If you don't, that's fine, no. And then there's this general one where you can add anything you want. So if your family is participating in the ILIAD studies and you have an ILIAD number, I just made up a number that I put in here, that is where you would put that. And that would enable us later to be able to connect those data sets in a de-identified way. So we're back here to get started. And we have a QR code, which I'm happy to share with you guys to be able to use for other purposes. And I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you so much, Karmen. That was amazing. That is the first time that we've been able to really see the kind of merits of all the work of the community, like getting actual answers, finding out, that these are novel mutations. We didn't know that. So thank you for spending time and actually going through all those numbers and letters and seeing if they correspond with any already published ones. I mean, that's just such important information to be able to pass on to researchers, because I can give you the names of 2 researchers right now who would want to know that. So I will I will let them know, so that that in itself, even though we only have the 30 genetic reports, which I agree with you is disappointing. 30 more than we could have had, I guess. But just to quickly, we've almost run out of time, but I will let any questions if we have time. But just to quickly kind of emphasize how important it is for CASK disorders, as the community uses the term CASK. CASK isn't actually a disorder. Like, the name CASK is just the name of the gene. As we all know, there are actually two disorders. Currently, without genetic report, Rare X can't distinguish between those disorders. They have no idea if that person has XLID with or without nystagmus, or whether they have MIC-PCH, if you haven't uploaded any kind of clinical report that contains genetics data. So I'm not saying it doesn't make the information meaningless, but it definitely dilutes the effectiveness of the data. So because of our unique situation of having these two disorders. So that's just the point I want to make, why it's so important, especially for our disease, our gene, to make sure you upload your genetic reports. So thank you so much to the 30 people that have done that. And I think the difficulty is getting hold of them. It's so super easy, as Karmen has explained, to actually upload them, but it's getting hold of them. But please just email your pediatrician, email your neurologist, whatever.
That's why we started curating the letters, because for a lot of people, it's so hard to get a hold of the report, the original report. And, honestly, like, if the physician has laid out what it is in a letter, great, we'll take it.
Yeah, I mean, that's especially important here in the UK. We don't tend to get those lab reports, but we should all have a report that is good enough for you guys, because I believe the NHS kind of reports them all in the same way, and the one I sent to you guys has been uploaded. So and I think in the US it's maybe slightly easier to get the full lab reports. So thank
it's
you.
just more common practice.
Yeah. So, and also just to add about the languages, you've rolled out more languages, and you can upload reports in different languages now.
Yeah, so for languages, we're like very close to getting the whole platform rolled out in a couple of different languages. But in terms of the genetic testing curation process, we can now curate genetic test reports and letters that are uploaded in Spanish, Portuguese, French, German, and Italian.
Wow, amazing. So has anybody got any questions for Karmen? Nope. I think the only question I have is, so when I've gone back on, so what I try and do, so we all have to be updating our data regularly on, I would advise, an annual basis, unless Karmen says otherwise. And so use a memorable time. So I think Rare Disease Day is a great time, unless you're busy doing something specifically for Rare Disease Day, or CASK Awareness Day is a really good time to remind yourself to go back onto Rare X. But what I sometimes find when I've gone back on, the original information seems to be on those surveys, and it feels like I'm deleting that historic information. So Karmen, can you just reassure everybody?
I'm reassuring you right now, you're not deleting it. So we pull that information forward because a lot of your responses are going to be the same, and we want it to be easier for you. But every single retake that you ever take is additional data it never overwrites what's been done before.
That's exactly what I felt, but it's just, you know, like you have this like feeling in your gut because you spent so long filling something in a year ago, and you're like, oh my gosh, I really hope I'm not deleting it. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that has that feeling, but it makes complete sense why you've kept everything there, because yeah, you wouldn't want to repeat everything if nothing has changed. So yeah, thank you for reassuring me and probably some other people.